Welcome, Giles and the Goalie Podcast. I am your host, Giles Farrell. Somewhere over there is Ben Remington.
Hello.
Ben, it is snowing once again, so we've been forced to retreat into the old Burnsville and Egan studios, respectively. How are you enjoying the snowy weather?
I didn't really mind it. I hate to sound like a fake tough guy or something, but I drove like an hour in it this morning, and then I snowballed my driveway, and it was delightful.
I should go out and shovel myself, but I didn't. I stayed indoors and watched a hockey game.
Yeah, I did too.
And it went about as poorly as one could hope for.
Yeah, what about as poorly as not shoveling your sidewalk goes?
Did you enjoy the first Sunday of non-football NHL slate of action?
Yeah, I mean, but it's being marred by this whole AAF business. And not that I have like an issue with the AAF. Like, I understand they're just trying to fill a void. You know, they're trying to make a buck. But you know, I'm seeing football tweets again, and granted, they're a little bit more on the fun and obscure side because nobody really knows what the hell is going on with this new football league. But it's still football in my timeline on Twitter all weekend long.
So what you're telling me is you don't enjoy the football tweets on Sunday?
Not really. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't really know what to think about the whole AF thing. I'm not sure if I'm interested in it. I'm not sure if I'm annoyed by it. I don't know where I stand.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, I haven't watched any of it. I don't really care. Like, I was delighted.
You didn't see Philip Nelson?
No, pass. I was delighted to see a slate of NHL games on Sunday, so I just watching hockey all day. That's a good day.
Sure.
Speaking of good days, or not good days, the Minnesota Wild had a return to action this week. They had 4 games on the calendar, and we will quickly kind of review those games here. But first game of the week, should probably have that pulled up.
Yeah.
Bueller. Okay, my bad. First game of the week, the Wild against the Buffalo Sabres. They in Buffalo, a 5-4 shootout loss, to the struggling Sabres. The Phil Housley bunch not doing so well, as I pointed out before the show on our YouTube channel, but the Wild somehow get a point. They really tried hard to give that one away, but a Zach Parise goal with 97 seconds left in the hockey game to tie it sends it to overtime, and then the skills competition decides the extra point, which goes to the Sabres. Then the Minnesota Wild came home for a brief one-game homestand. They played the Edmonton Oilers. They lose 4-1, and probably one of the worst performances I've seen in a home game in memory. Really reminded me of the 2013 game against Edmonton, where the Wild had a chance to clinch a playoff spot, and they had, I think it was like 6-1 or something like that. They lost. Josh Harding got the Bronx cheers after returning from his battle with MS because he couldn't stop a puck. It was a dreadful game. And then Saturday, the Wild get a huge 4-2 win over the New Jersey Devils as they continue to tread water, featuring goals by... I have no idea. Marcus Foligno scored a goal. That's what I remember. For whatever reason, Hockey Reference doesn't have that page on their site, the scores, so that's weird. But anyway, Wild win 4-2, and then Sunday afternoon, the Wild, who got off to a real sleepy start, as Ben appropriately yawns into the microphone.
Yep.
perfectly summarizing the hockey game. But the Wild lose 2-1 to the Islanders. Was that correct?
Yes.
Yep. I quickly scrubbed that one from memory, but 2-1 loss to the Metropolitan leading New York Islanders. If you can believe that.
Yeah.
So since the All-Star break, the Wild have won just 1 out of, what was that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 games. 1 out of 6. They are 1-2-2. No, my apologies. 1-3-2. Math is hard.
Math is hard.
But not a good start to the All-Star break from the Wild, in which I pointed out on zone coverage last week that they could really make some ground on their schedule because they are playing a lot of teams who are not in the playoffs, and appropriately they are squandering that that start.
So, yeah, like exactly how you're saying, they're just absolutely pissing away chances to beat teams that they should beat, and theoretically at least. And they're just making it harder for themselves down the line. But I feel like, and this isn't going to be guaranteed or anything, they're going to do this the hard way. And you've made jokes about this and posted a meme on the podcast account about this. Like they're going to face March, where I haven't looked at their schedule, I haven't dissected their schedule, but I think it's a pretty tough month. They're going to go into March really behind the 8 ball, and they're going to have to gut out some big time wins against some really good teams in March to make the playoffs. And that just kind of seems to be like the Wild MO, right? Like that's just kind of what they do season in and season out, is they find the most difficult path possible to the playoffs, and they choose it like almost willingly.
Correct. Every year. It's like clockwork. They're so efficient at doing it every year. It really is quite something.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe this is the year they don't make the playoffs. That's entirely possible. And we should get into that because, obviously Koivu and all that jazz.
Well, yeah, I mean, what's working for them right now is nobody outside of the the Kings, the Blues, and the Blackhawks, the teams who were firmly entrenched in the bottom of the Western Conference standings, are winning now. Everyone else is losing. Yeah. So, the Wild have lost ground, and we'll get into this later, but they're still somehow holding a wild card spot. The West is so pathetic.
It's really weird. I mean, it's just like, I'm looking at it right now, and we can get into this with Central Intelligence, but they're 2 points behind Dallas and only 4 points ahead of Chicago. Like 3rd through 7th in the Central is 6 points.
Right.
Like that's bananas. This late in the season, especially, and considering the start that Chicago had, my God, they got Joe Quenneville fired. And so yeah, to your point, and the Pacific Division isn't much better. Like they're really, doing their best to kind of screw the pooch. I don't know how Calgary is as good as they are, but I guess it is what it is at this point. San Jose and Vegas, you would sort of expect up there this season. But yeah, like you said, the Kings are actually kind of turning things around a little bit and making up ground. The Ducks finally got wise up enough to fire Randy Carlyle, which probably took about 3 seasons too long. But it's just a complete crapshoot right now, and I don't know. It feels like none of this is going to be decided until the 3rd week in March, or the last week of March, or even the last week of the season, the 1st week in April.
I mean, we can thank them for Bruce Boudreau. I mean,
sure, absolutely.
That's what we can thank them for.
I'm not mad at the Ducks. I think it's high comedy.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned that Mikko Koivu was in the news this week as he left the Buffalo game in the second period on Tuesday. He left with after an awkward collision at center ice, and kind of an awkward knee-on-knee collision, not intentional in any stretch of the imagination, but he leaves, does not return. Chad Graff, who was actually covering the game for The Athletic, reported that he left the arena on crutches. Yep. And then the next day, the fears were realized as Koivu was announced a torn ACL and meniscus, and he had surgery on Friday to repair that, but he is done for the year. And kind of puts his status heading into next training camp in question, as it does take a considerable amount of time to recover from that procedure. But Wild lose their best defensive center iceman for the remainder of a season in which, as I pointed out on zone coverage, which you should be reading every day, hint, hint, it's really going to be hard to replace Mikko Koivu, and I listed off a couple players who need to step up in his absence because of his defensive prowess. And I think I don't know. It wasn't totally outside the box thinking with my players who need to step up, but I highlighted at the time I was under the assumption Charlie Coyle was going to be moved back to center. He has not been as of yet, which is kind of a head scratcher, and we can maybe discuss that in a little bit. But Coyle was one, and then obviously Victor Rask, who was probably going to get increased minutes, although he got demoted to the fourth line this week, which really, really hits it home. And then the third was Joel Eriksson Ek, who was immediately recalled from Iowa, and he's played the part really well since he's been recalled. So one of those three players has kind of answered the call here for Minnesota, but Coyle kind of gets a pass because he hasn't gone back to center like I thought.
Yeah. But, I think the reasoning for that, and there's probably multiple. If I were to give two reasons for it in Bruce Boudreau's mind, I think, and this, it goes back to me whoring out something I wrote about a couple weeks ago, but Coyle is one of the very few right-handed forwards they have. And so maybe keeping him on a wing where, you need that handedness, maybe that was part of the thought. Also, something straight from Boudreau's mouth is Mikael Granlund had not been playing well lately. And Boudreau described him, amongst others, as a shell of the player that he was when he got here.
Yeah.
And so moving him to center, maybe that's a way to get him going. That's not a real... I don't know if that's a great way to get a player going by moving him from wing to center, especially when he had done so well at wing after being moved from center. But I don't know, maybe it was just something where he just needed a prod, and that's, that was maybe something that Boudreau thought might spark him a little bit. I don't know. That and the Coyle handedness thing, those are the two things that I kind of thought of right off the bat. Because otherwise, you would have totally expected Coyle to move back to center. But, like I said, this team is very short of right-handers, and Granlund not playing well.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's such a crippling injury to a team that, has had some pretty bad injuries already this season, losing Matt Dumba, for basically the season in December. But I tweeted this out. We can dog on Koivu's offense. Like, since I wrote about him in late November and how good he was offensively this season, he's been not good on the offensive side by any stretch of the means. So I'll send him a apologies card. But he still was incredible defensively, and shutting down top forwards has been, his key. Fittingly, the first game the Wild played post-Koivu injury was the Edmonton Oilers. And who do they have? They have Connor McDavid. They have Leon Draisaitl. Koivu more than likely gets matched up with those guys, and, maybe the game is different. I don't know. But he did a decent job against them earlier in the year, and that's something you go back and watch, and it's hard to replace a guy who's so good defensively, and especially one who can suppress shots like he does, because he knows what he's doing, and he's been arguably one of the top 3 defensive forwards in the league for the last 4, 5, 6 years, and just hasn't gotten his his due in terms of like the Selke. But the Wild can overcome this injury, but they haven't really played like it. And something that's really been wrong, and I didn't highlight this, but the offense has been quite awful since, really January 1st, maybe even before that. The Wild offense has been, I think they're like bottom 4 in the league in goals for since like mid-December or something, which is terrible. Granlund has like 3 goals in the last 3 months, including, his today against the Islanders. That's not good. Jason Zucker has had extended slumps this season from which he hasn't bounced out of yet. That's not been good. You traded a guy who loves to take shots like Nino Niederreiter and was bound to rebound offensively at some point, but he never got that chance here this year because he got traded. And what happened? He's scored 6 goals in 9 games since the trade. Nice. And it just
to your point, not to pee in your Wheaties here, but the Wild are tied for 18th in the NHL in goals since January 1st. So not good. Very middle of the pack.
I don't know where I saw that then. I swear I saw that somewhere over the weekend. That's what has been ailing them, is they're not scoring, and they are slowly drifting towards the bottom of the league in offense.
Oh, I don't doubt that at all. Yeah, I'm sure they were much higher back in the day, but right now they're currently 18th since January 1st. On the season, they are... Season, they are 24th.
Yeah.
So they
That's
have
not good.
somehow, yeah, they've drifted to the bottom third of the league in goals scored.
So speaking of players who have not been performing up to par for the Wild, Mikko Granlund is, pretty much right now forefront of the offensive problems the Wild are having. And since November 13th, including his goal Sunday against the Islanders, Granlund has just 3 goals in that time. That's almost 3 months. And just to clarify how bad that is, I put a slight list together of players who have scored more goals than he has in that time. First on the list with 4 is teammate Marcus Foligno.
Yeah, that's what you would expect out of Foligno, though.
Right. He's got, 4, which is, par for his course.
That's actually decent for him.
We also have on the list Milan Lucic with 4.
That's just downright funny right there.
He's pretty bad.
And
then
that's funny.
the last one I found that's comical, also with 4, is old teammate Jason Pominville.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Final year of that contract.
Yeah, remember when that was the Albatross contract that the Wild had problems with?
Right.
So this is, a big part of his problem is the guy just doesn't shoot. It really is a huge problem that, for as great as a passer as he is, him not being able to shoot the puck it's frustrating. It's frustrating to watch because pretty much any time you watch a team like on the penalty kill or just 5-on-5 in general, when Mikko Granlund's on the ice and he has the puck in the offensive zone, everybody just cheats for the pass.
Yeah.
And you could do a case study on this, but good Lord, he's got a good shot. He used it quite well in the beginning of the season when he was having pretty decent success at shooting. And for whatever reason, since mid-November, he's just quit doing that. And he's not putting up the goals. And then his passes are not, they're not having the desired effect, essentially. So his inability to shoot has now caused his elite passing skills to kind of fall off because everyone's cheating for the pass, so he's not getting passes to anyone in the offensive zone, which he's still putting up, assists, but the Wild offense is suffering, and a guy like Jason Zucker, who has benefited from Granlund, is not getting goals either. And that, could be kind of an underlying problem of Zucker not, scoring goals like he should be.
Yeah.
So this is kind of where I've been kind of wondering with my thought process in the last week is if you get a decent trade offer for Mikko Granlund before the deadline, do you take it? I mean, teams love to pay out at the trade deadline for players who still have a year remaining on their contract. Rentals are they've kind of been gone away from a little bit in the sense since the Hansel trade, in which the Wild just massively, shelled out for third-line center.
Yeah.
But, well, I thought that until Brian Boyle got a second-round pick last week.
Yeah, right.
If you get a decent trade offer for some returns, do you take it? Because, Granlund, going into the last year of his contract next year, and remains to be seen if the Wild, want to invest in a long-term deal for him, because it really depends on what kind of salary he's going to demand. And if he does still demand a high salary, then, yeah, you probably have to move him. But do you risk kind of really throwing the season off the rails by moving him at the deadline?
Jeez. I think it really depends on where they're at exactly at the deadline, and that sounds extremely short-sighted, and it kind of is. But I just kind of think that's how it goes, right? Like, I think this is kind of, what they're going to do, and I don't know. I think if they make the decision to deal Stahl at the deadline, you might as well deal Granlund too at that point, right? Like, if you're going to keep Stahl and be like, we're just going to stick it out, see if we can re-sign him. We want him for this stretch run. Great. Then that's your game plan. You're going to try to make the playoffs. And a lot of people can argue the point of making the playoffs with a team this flawed. But you're still going to try to make the playoffs, right? Like, anything can happen, blah, blah, blah. We've seen it before, whatever. So I don't know. I feel like it almost hinges on where they are and what they do with Stahl. Because if you're going to deal Stahl, well, hell, at that point, you might as well deal Granlund, right? Like, you deal Stahl, you're packing it in. And Granlund might as well go, too, for the exact points that you've made, if you get a good deal for him. Let's put that right up front. Like, you're not, looking to give him away like you did Nino. But if you get a jaw-dropping deal for him, and, I mean, a 26-year-old 60-point guy, with a contract that's not absurd and only a year left on it, I mean, you should be able to get a haul for him, an absolute haul. And for those people who are looking for this team to kind of retool on the fly, that if you can get a good young NHL player back for him and some picks and prospects, maybe that's the right move to make. Maybe that's the retooling that this team needs. Maybe that's the shakeup that this roster needs. So, I don't know. Is that how you feel on it, or what are your thoughts on the prerequisites?
I mean, yeah, it does largely hinge on what kind of a return you can get. I mean, I don't have a lot of confidence at the moment, and Paul Fenn,
right.
Maybe fleecing somebody in a Granlund trade. And I also, kind of been back and forth on, is this a scenario in which you may be selling a little lower on Granlund because of his struggles right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
And really how everyone has the book on him that this is a guy who's not going to shoot, he's going to pass. Yeah. So do you want to give up premium assets for a guy that is just going to pass when he has a clear lane to the net in the offensive zone and doesn't take it?
Yeah.
Every time. That's kind of what I wonder. I don't think he'll get moved before the deadline this year. I think that's something probably will happen in the offseason. But
I would agree.
It's just something that, has kind of crept into my head here that, with as much as teams now, like I said, they love to give up the big assets at the deadline for players who have still a year left on their deal as opposed to rentals.
Yep.
Because you're getting another full year out of this guy, so teams are more willing to give up that asset, but that's...
Yeah, if you can get into a bidding war, and that's just it. I'm sure that's what happened with Martin Hansel, right? Like, there's no way that Chuck Fletcher came out guns blazing with a first and a second and a fourth or whatever the hell it all was. You have to escalate it, and you have to play a little defense to keep them away from other teams in your own division. So, yeah, if they can shop them a little bit, and that's not necessarily being aggressive, that's just Paul Fedden doing his job and answering the phone. If you can shop him a little bit and maybe get a little bit more than he's worth right now, that kind of makes up for him being a very obvious sell low kind of guy right now. Like, his value is down right now, but if you can get a little bit of a bidding war at the deadline, maybe that gets you to the return where it's not selling low anymore.
Who's a more valuable asset on the trade market right now, Granlund or Charlie Coyle?
I still think it's Granlund. Granlund's proven a lot more. I think Coyle's played a lot better lately, and I think that his size, probably gets a chubby going for very many GMs.
Jesus.
But I think it's Granlund. I think he's got probably more pure talent, and he's got a better track record. 2 straight seasons of over 60 points. That's pretty decent. Like that, especially as bad as Coyle's year was last year. 2 years ago, I think Coyle had like 57 points, something like that. So he's knocking on the door. But then he had that abysmal season last year, and as good as he's been in the last month or two here, I don't know. I feel like Granlund still probably has a little bit more value. It's close, though, to your point.
So I saw my cousin on Saturday night, last night,
yeah.
And he was trying to pitch this idea to me, and we were out having a few, so it took my brain a while to kind of process this, but he basically said the Wild should kind of sell off kind of what they can and just get higher draft picks over the next couple of years. And if you can get, up into the top 10 in terms of draft picks, you're getting some more premium talent, hopefully. And then you package that with, and there's a big if here that I reminded him of Kirill Kaprizov coming over when his contract expires. So you're injecting a lot of youth into the Wild roster over the next couple of years, and
right.
I didn't disagree. I think there's a lot of ifs there. Like I said, Kaprizov one coming here, there's no guarantee, and then the draft picks panning out. It would be so wild to get finally up and higher draft picks, and then they just butcher the picks as per their history, essentially outside of a few players. But it didn't come across as that terrible of an idea. Although what I left out of this was the crux of his trading and getting like decent returns and really embracing a tank was trading Dubnyk.
Oh, right.
Which, again, isn't a far-fetched idea. It just, you're trading Dubnyk, so you're really throwing in the towel. And you could probably still get a good return on Dubnyk if you really wanted to move him, but I don't know. There's a lot of things that have to go for that to happen that I just don't see the Wild doing or having fall into their lap like the plan sounded. It sounded good in theory.
Yeah, in theory, sure. And the issue that I have with the tanking idea that's been popularized by some unnamed radio folks and, everyone on Twitter, that's the hot button right now, right? Well, we got to tank. So you got to burn this team down and you got to tank. And that's not happening. you with this roster as it's constructed, you would have to trade damn near everyone. And you can't trade Preezy and Suter. You can't just give away Dubnyk and Stahl. And Koivu you can't deal. So it's not that easy. And in order to make tanking successful, like, you have to do what the Oilers unintentionally did and get a generational talent, or what the Leafs did and get a generational talent in Austin Matthews. What the Sabres did, getting Jack Eichel, that was obviously a big deal for their franchise. If you just sneak into the top 10 of the NHL draft, you're not getting a generational talent. And you're just as likely to completely whiff on a guy as you are getting a guy who's going to change your franchise enough to where it's worth it. I mean, we see plenty of guys go in the middle to the end of the first round that are just as good as anybody that went in the top 15. And that's my issue that I have with tanking. It sounds so easy to everyone. It sounds so alluring to get these better players that mythically show up inside the top 10 of the NHL draft. Well, okay, I'm sorry, but those players that actually make your world-changing franchise moves, those are in the top 2, and that's it. And so if you want to play the lottery and gamble on the ping pong balls bouncing in your favor because you're a non-playoff team, be my guest. But I just don't think that it's going to make this team that much markedly better to where it's worth literally trading everybody. You know what I mean?
And, to your point, the draft lottery in recent years, there have been a lot of teams who've made significant jump ups with their minuscule percentages to get in the lottery. But,
sure.
That's never a sure thing,
often.
right?
And do you think it's going to happen to this team?
No.
Right.
That's just a cold, hard no. So before we, go down the rabbit hole of being way too negative here, I did want to bring up a positive that the Minnesota Wild do have going for them on this roster right now, and that is Jared Spurgeon continues to wholly impress here. Really, in the absence of Matt Dumba, it seems like he's found a completely another gear, which I didn't think was possible because of how good he was, but
right.
He really has really stepped it up here for the Wild. And I did tweet this out on, what was that, Wednesday? But since January 1st, and this could have changed, I should probably go in and check again, but since January 1st, the Wild point leader at that time was Jared Spurgeon with 13.
Mm-hmm.
And then furthermore, when he, because he scored on, Tuesday against Buffalo, he hit the 10-goal mark this season, which was the third time in his career that he's hit the 10-plus goal mark in a season. And he became just the second defenseman in team history to have 3 10-plus goal seasons, and the other is Matt Dumba, who has 4 of those, including this year.
Right.
And then, hilariously, if you also look at the list of Wild defensemen, and I'm putting defensemen in quotes, who have hit 10-plus goals in a season, you have Brent Burns, who did it twice, although, again, that's why I put defenseman in quotes, because Brent Burns...
Right, he played wing a lot there, yeah.
He did a lot of flipping between wing and defense. Then you have noted Wild stalwart defenseman Marc-Andre Bergeron.
Jesus Christ.
Marek Zidlicki, or Zidlicki.
Zidlicki?
Yeah, he flipped back... He's like Visante Shanko, and the fact that he could never figure out how to pronounce his name, so it was different every year.
I thought you were going to go in a totally different direction when you brought up Visante Shanko.
No, we didn't get Marek Zidlicki's Wang on TV.
No.
Then you have Lubomir Sekerash.
Suffering Sekerash himself.
And then Curtis Foster.
Yep.
That's your list. That's defensemen in Wild history who've hit 10-plus goals in a season. Such a good, high-standing list of players, but this is the other thing I've been thinking about this week is because Jared Spurgeon has been really valuable to the Wild, not only this year, but basically his whole time with the Wild when he was plucked away from the Islanders for nothing. He has a year and a half left on his contract, making $5.187 on the cap, and next year will be his age 30 season, so he's getting, up on the wrong side of 30, but, with that said, he's still great offensively, and he's even better defensively because he is always in the right spot and always does the right thing, and right. I don't think enough people take notice of Jared Spurgeon. One of the Edmonton writers, I think it was Jonathan Willis of The Athletic, he called out Spurgeon after the game on Thursday when he just said, Spurgeon is one of my favorite players to watch because he's always in the right spot and always does the right thing.
Yeah.
And if the Wild are, more looking at maybe selling at this point, is Jared Spurgeon another guy who you maybe look at moving to get maybe a premium return on as a right-shot defenseman, year and a half left on a deal, and you're getting a guy who is really solid all around in what he does.
Yeah, somebody brought that up about Brodin getting dealt, and I actually mentioned this in my mailbag on Friday, where it's entirely possible that Spurgeon gets dealt before Brodin does because of that contract, because he'll be a free agent after next season. So again, kind of like how we talked about with Granlund, where rentals aren't really all that enticing, but you can really get a huge return out of a guy who has a year left. And so with Spurgeon, it's like, is he? Do you think you can re-sign him? I guess is the deal, and maybe that makes it to where that's a deal that happens this summer instead, when you can re-sign him or not. Like that's maybe a conversation they have yet to have, but I don't know. It would be extremely sad to see Spurgeon go, and who knows what his feelings are on staying here or not. But it just it's entirely possible he gets dealt. He's got, I believe, a modified.
Yeah,
he's got a modified no trade clause. So I believe he's just got a list, probably 10 or 15 teams, or maybe not even that. But so it won't be impossible to deal him. But yeah, for all those reasons he brought up, it's entirely possible he gets moved, and it would be very unfortunate. But that's kind of how these things work sometimes.
And that, again, I don't. You haven't heard Jared Spurgeon's name out there, and that's probably a good thing. But it's just something that I've been thinking about here in the last, week or so, and thinking about should the Wild sell or, move on from some players. And I think at this point, Paul Fenton's probably seen Jared Spurgeon enough to go that, man, if I trade this guy, then yeah, full on tank, because you're giving away your best defenseman on the roster. And right-shot defensemen do not grow on trees, and one that is really good, like Jared Spurgeon especially, does not grow on trees. And you would have to get such a great return, and I don't know if the Wild would get that because the league seemingly does not value Jared Spurgeon the way the Wild does.
Right.
Which I don't understand at this point, but I don't know. Just another thing I was thinking about this week. So
yeah, gladly, the Wild do value him as much as they do. It would be really unfortunate if they didn't, because they would have probably given away a long time ago.
Man, whenever the Wild and the Islanders get together in a trade, the Wild do a good job of fleecing the Islanders. Actually, I don't even think they traded for Spurgeon. I think he just got picked up off the waivers.
Yeah, they just signed him.
Man, the Islanders are terrible. Not this
Thank
year,
you, Garth Snow.
They're good this year. I apologize.
Yeah, well,
All right. That just another thing to think about, but we can move on here to our Bruce Boudreau quote of the week.
Hi, this is Bruce Boudreau. I don't see how in Toronto that they're calling it, unless it's a guy they just pulled in off the street that hasn't seen hockey before. If I were the fans, I'd be booing even more, because they pay good money for this. If you want it, don't just think you want it. Go out and f***ing want it.
All right, your Bruce Boudreau quote of the week. I don't know what to make of this, and it's been kind of just grained in my head all week, so I'm curious to know what you think, but this was after the February 5th game against Buffalo. After the game, we saw Victor Rask lead off the shootout for the Wild, in which he just had the absolute worst shootout attempt that I have seen in recent memory, and we all remember Devin Setaguchi's atrocity, several moons ago. But Bruce Boudreau was asked post-game why Rask started the shootout over literally any one of his other skilled players who have had better success in the shootout. And Boudreau replied with, there was a reason, and when asked about the reason, Bruce Boudreau just replied with, there was a reason. So he did not tip his hand at all on what the reason is, but there's a lot in him just saying there's a reason and then not going into why there was a reason. And
right.
I don't know if this is just a kind of a stick it to the general manager just to say, hey, this is your guy and I'm showing you how terrible he is, or was this something that came down from the general manager's office that said, yeah, you need to focus this guy more and to try to prove his worth?
I really hope that's not the case. I would lean more towards showing the GM how much he screwed up. But my initial thought of it was, showing the rest of the roster that, hey, nobody's scoring right now. Nobody's doing anything. Kind of like how some people thought the Nino trade was like a shot across the bow or a threat to the rest of the roster that you can be traded if you don't produce. I don't know. I thought of it kind of like that when there was, when he said there was a reason, there was a reason. I just that was my immediate thought. But I like the idea that he's basically sticking it to Paul Fenton and saying, hey, yeah, sure glad starting the shootout with Nino wouldn't have surprised anybody. But starting the shootout with this freaking plug, and then he botches it predictably. That's something where it's like, you better not fire me because you're the one that stuck me with this mess.
Yeah, what a great shootout attempt that was, and I don't know. I'm not gonna dog on Victor Rask anymore on this podcast unless I think it's really necessary, but I have done plenty of that on Twitter.com, but
true.
Just that GIF I tweeted out of the shootout attempt, also, mind you, it also did very moderately well in the Carolina part of the map.
Oh, I bet.
It got picked up by the Carolina writers, and so it just a lot of condolences put in my mentions about Victor Rask. So that's that. That's the Bruce Boudreau quote of the week. We can slide now on over to our Krill Watch.
Kaprizov across the goose end. Kaprizov shoots and he scores! He scores! The Russians are golden in South Korea.
All right, Ben, Kirill Kaprizov, he had a week off, which, hey, good for him. But on the season, 51 games played, 24 goals, 15 assists, 39 points for CSKA Moscow. But like I said, no games this week for him, so we don't really have much to discuss on his goals or whatnot. So with that said, do you have any other prospect you wish to highlight?
Sure. So I was looking at a guy we caught up with earlier in the season, but fun little note about him. He has been traded, and so I'm talking about one Sean Boudreaux. He is a 6th-round pick of the Wild in this past draft. As we talked about, we were big fans of what the Wild did late in the draft this year after botching the first round mightily. Sean Boudreaux is one pick that turned out pretty well so far. He's playing over in the Q, which is not a place that the Wild frequent for prospects, but he recently got traded from the Gatineau Olympiques to the Cape Breton Screaming Eagles. And so far in this season, he has played 47 games. He has 40 points, which is pretty solid. The Q is a fairly defensive league. Just kind of on the whole, they tend to not have a ton of scoring. It's not like the OHL. It's kind of the lower end of scoring in Canadian juniors. But Sean Boudreaux is having a pretty good season for 2 different teams in the Q. Big boy, 6'5", listed at 216 pounds at the tender age of 19. So be interested to see what happens with him. The fact he was traded is a good sign. He's obviously desired. he's something that another team wanted to bolster their lineup. So it should be interesting to see how his career turns out. These 6th-round picks, obviously, we've said it multiple times before. You never want to get your hopes up, but the fact that he's producing is a good thing.
Yeah, no, that's always a good thing, even for late-round picks. So that's that is your career watch. That's your prospect watch for the week. Now we go over to our Central Intelligence.
Central Intelligence.
Yeah, I've been scoreboard watching since opening night. So I don't know if that counts or anything, but I think hockey players are hockey players, and they want to see where they are, and they know how close everything is. They know that every game is vital.
All right, Ben. Central Intelligence. We've got quite a bit ground to cover here. As the Central Division is, it's alive and well. The Jets, 73 points, lead the Central Division. Nashville, 71 points, second. Then you have a drop to the Dallas Stars, who 61 points. They are 3rd place and would be matched up with the Predators if the playoffs started today. Let that sink in for a minute. Then behind the Stars, you have, wait for it, the Fighting Berubis, formerly the Fightin' Yos. The St. Louis Blues at 59 points. They have the tiebreaker over the Minnesota Wild with 2 less games played. Then you have the Wild at 59 points with 56 games played. The Blues, 6 games in a row they have won, including Sunday afternoon here over the Nashville Predators in overtime. Vlad Tarasenko with a hat trick. Then you have the Avalanche at 55 points. They are still just in a nosedive. They've lost 3 in a row in overtime. And then you got the Chicago Blackhawks, 55 points. They've won 7 games in a row. They're only 4 points out of a playoff spot. And that's the Central Division. That everyone is in it. Imagine that. Because the rest of the West is crap.
Yeah. Yeah, it's getting really wild. I think almost everyone had really written off Chicago, especially after they fired Quenneville. Just kind of, they didn't make the playoffs last year. This is going to be a lost season for them. They're maybe trying to reset a little bit. They're starting Cam freaking Ward, of all people.
Cam Ward, baby.
But here they are. I mean, I know Colin Delia has been pretty good as far as the backup goaltender. Cam Ward apparently has been not awful enough. And, the Central is super tight again, and I guess that's just kind of how it goes, it kind of feels like it's almost this tight nearly every season. But, maybe this season it's really one of those races to the very end.
Yeah, and I think what makes this more maddening is a couple of things I'll bring up here is, first of all, the fact that the Wild have lost more games at home this year than they've won. They've lost 14 out of 27 home games this year. For a team that prides itself on being great at home, this is pretty damning that you've lost more home games than you won. And more recently, your home games have been kind of bad. So maybe there's too much of a comfort level at home right now for this team. I don't know. I'm spitballing here, but. And then the other thing that's pretty maddening is I threw this out earlier, but the Wild are 1-3-2 out of the break, and they have a very lax schedule in February. And the fact that they're not making any kind of hay with this so far is, I think we can safely say that one way or another we're going to look back on this February schedule and go, yeah, that's where the Wild either, they got up into the playoffs or that's where they lost it, because the schedule in March is absolutely atrocious. And if you continue to just give away points at this juncture, then good luck trying to beat the good teams in March that, they're probably going to take it to you because the Wild are not overly great. So,
yeah. No, I totally agree, and it's tough, and something we didn't talk about in the main segment. Them starting Dubnyk on a back-to-back this weekend, and Boudreau kind of coming up with a little bit of a hokey excuse for doing it. It just kind of, the whole Stalock thing. It's like if you don't trust your backup to win any game that you put him in, basically, if you're already in desperation mode. To the point where you're starting your starting goaltender every single night, even on back-to-backs, like that spells for kind of imminent disaster. And so, to kind of work into your point, I mean, they really need to do something in February, because if they're planning on starting Devan Dubnyk for every game in the month of March, I feel like we've seen Devan Dubnyk kind of wear out before as the season rolls on. And this year would definitely be no exception because they've rode him pretty hard this year.
Right, and it's as if you don't have confidence in your backup goaltender that you just signed to a 3-year extension.
No, that's not it at all.
I mean,
it's just that you didn't practice today.
Right. I don't know. It's maddening when you just think about it, but hey, we just cover the team, so what do we care, right?
From a distance, yes.
God damn it. Okay. That is our Central Intelligence report for the week. And then we go, last but not least, into jerseys.
Here to start the third period. What team is this? It's not Team USA. Well, yes, it is. They've got on new uniforms. They're wearing the logo of the Duck. I've never seen this before.
All right, Ben, the jersey kind of topic du jour this week is we actually are going to do a jersey mailbag. We kind of take maybe a week off here and, just kind of hit on some questions that our listeners may have on jerseys, but we're going to kind of go through a mailbag here and come back next week with another jersey topic and get back to the jersey video topic. So this week we're not going to do a video, so for what it's worth. So, but hey, check out our YouTube channel anyway for our past jersey segments that we've dabbled in. But first question in our jersey mailbag comes from our friend Tony of The Athletic. He asks, what is an off-the-wall color scheme you would want to see tried on a jersey?
That's a good question. I feel like damn near every color scheme has almost been approached. Everyone that I would want to see has been approached. As far as the NHL goes, I don't know. I feel like there isn't anything that I'm really missing so much. I don't know. What do you? I mean, I guess we haven't seen purple in a while. Not that I'm crazy about that color.
Yeah, we know your stance.
What?
I said, yeah, we know your stance on purple.
But yeah, it feels like everything's kind of been tried and everything's kind of been. I mean, I guess one thing that kind of jumped out to me was. There's not much black and white. I mean, the Kings are kind of doing it, but there's silver in there. And then I don't even think we want to talk about those hideous Tampa Bay jerseys. But that might be something where if you did a super simple black and white, that might be a jersey that's a good look. I mean, kind of like the Gretzky era, maybe without, even simpler yet, without the silver. I don't know. That's something that's not, I feel like, very common. But I don't know. There's plenty of color combinations out there, I guess, that haven't been approached. But I just don't know of any of them that I would really want to see an NHL team adopt. I don't know what. I guess I'd frame it in what would be fun for Seattle to do, since that's kind of the one blank canvas that we have available to us.
I mean, it feels like it's got to be a slam dunk where they go with like supersonic colors,
green and yellow.
Yeah, like maybe I'm off my rocker on that, but it feels like you almost have to. But hey, I could be wrong.
Yeah,
but I don't know. When I read the question, I was kind of thinking more like team specific, like what off the wall.
Oh, sure.
And so, like, the first thing I thought of was, like, yeah, give me the Philadelphia Flyers teal jerseys. Just get those out of the closet. Let's go. But I don't know. I feel like, especially now as we're seeing with the Tampa Bay Lightning, like, we're going to see some weird, like, gradient.
Ugh.
Gradient is really starting to come in, and it's making me uncomfortable. But I don't know. Feels like we're kind of heading into the gradient era, which
no.
Yeah, we tremble
God,
in fear. Not. But yeah, that's you're pretty much right that there really hasn't been anything that's kind of done already. Like everything's out there.
Yeah, I guess one that I just thought of that kind of hits a chord locally is there isn't really anything maroon out there. I know that red is obviously a pretty popular color, but if you think of maroon as like a shade that it's used a ton in college, not just the Gophers. I mean, you're talking your Oklahomas, your Mississippi States, your I guess Arkansas is more red, but there's all sorts of maroon. Darker reds, Crimson Tide being used in college, and it just really isn't a color used in the NHL. So I guess if you're going to go with a color combination that I haven't seen that I'd like to see, maroon, and usually it goes well with like a gold, like the Gophers, or maybe like a cream color, like your Oklahomas and your Texas A&Ms, maybe. That's something. But as far as the Seattle thing goes, I kind of have I'd have a plan that I would love to execute if I'm kind of in charge in Seattle, and that's get into some kind of negotiations with Vancouver, because Seattle, every team they have right now is plays off of blue and green, and they made mention to it when they had their introductory press conference. They're like, well, we really like blue and green around here, but that's kind of already taken by our neighbors to the north. I think that, if I'm them, I donate, let's say, $1 million to the Canucks team fund or Canucks charity, whatever it may be. I'm sure they have a team fund. And if I'm the Canucks, I gladly take it, and as a sign of goodwill to my new neighbors, I go back to the black, red, and yellow. And I think that sets up kind of a nice little... you can see it as either something very neighborly, something very welcoming, or you can see it as kind of the beginning of a rivalry a little bit where, their fans can complain about Seattle stealing their colors. So I don't know. That's just kind of my thought on the whole Seattle thing. I would like to see them go with the green and blue, just because I kind of like it when an entire market bands together with a color scheme like that. I think it would be kind of cool. But green and yellow, I think, would work since, Vancouver is using mostly blue jerseys. I think green and yellow Supersonics colors would be pretty cool.
All right, next question again from Tony. He asks, you get to redesign the Wild name, color scheme, logo. The catch, you cannot use North Stars, Fighting Saints, or Wild, like graphics or color schemes. What do you do?
I haven't even the foggiest. The naming contest, and I don't know if we ever discussed this, but The names that were thrown out there for this hockey team that fans got to vote on, and I'm putting vote in air quotes, I didn't think any of them were all that especially great. I don't know. Did you?
Absolutely not.
No?
No, they were awful.
Yeah, like the White Bears, I mean, that just, I don't know, it seems like you would just call them the Bears, and then you've got the Chicago Bears. I think there was the Freeze, which is pretty bad. Voyagers, pretty bad. Northern Lights, pretty bad. The Blue Ox I like, but I don't know that's an awesome name for a minor league team. You know, I don't know that I can hand off a full NHL team to the Blue Ox, but I guess I would probably go with that. I maybe might rather have that than the Wild. I'm not sure. And then obviously the colors would have to be blue. And you could probably have some fun with that logo and kind of play off Paul Bunyan quite a bit. And so I think that might have been maybe the best way to go. Looking at it from just like a sheer marketing standpoint, like you could really just throttle the whole Paul Bunyan thing because he's obviously a big figure in lore around here.
I guess kind of going back to what you said with maroon and gold in the last question, that probably would have been the crux of my color scheme for the Minnesota NHL franchise. But it's difficult to come up with a name that sticks, especially considering the 5 that this team had to pick from. Yeah. And I don't know. I would have just. I don't even know what I would have gone with. I'm going to punt on the name, but maroon and gold would have been my color scheme because it's a pretty dominant color scheme in the state, period. So
yeah,
you might as well incorporate that into your professional team. So yeah.
And then, the name that I actually submitted a name to this contest. And it was kind of funny because, they had a sign-up sheet where, hey, submit a name for the Minnesota Wild, and I don't know, there was probably prizes attached. I don't even know. But I was 11 or 12 or something like that. And I look at the sheet, the sign-up sheet, right, and it's got all the names written down that people are submitting. I kid you not, nearly every other name was the Minnesota Tax.
Good Lord.
Even at 11 or 12 years old, I'm reading all these people that Minnesota Tax, and I'm just like, man, people are really pissed about taxes. Obviously didn't know anything about the geopolitical status of the state at that time in my life, but I just look back now and I think it's kind of funny just looking back. But actually the name that I submitted, which was terrible because I was 12, was the Minnesota Tornadoes. And for some reason, 12-year-old me thought that would be an excellent nickname for a hockey team.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's pretty rough. I mean, yeah. I don't know if it's bad as the Wild, but it's pretty rough.
Speaking of rough, the last question we got in the mailbag from our friend Pete, are the Wild doomed to never win the Stanley Cup? This wasn't Jersey related, but, it's rough.
Way to stick to the theme, Pete.
Pete's good at, staying in the lane. Probably. That'll be my answer to that. So.
I mean, yeah, I guess. I mean, never say never, and this team is certainly, it feels like it's at its worst right now, even though we've had stretches much, much worse than this. I don't know. I think it'll happen eventually, but, maybe this current iteration it's not, certainly doesn't look like anything is going to come of it. So, eventually, keep your chin up, Pete.
Yeah, that can do it for us this week. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. You can find our Otherwise Fine production on iTunes. If you listen on iTunes, do drop us a rating. You can find us on Spotify, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Google Play, all that fun stuff. You can also find our shows and all of our written content at zonecoverage.com/wild, zonecoverage.com/subscribe. Use promo code GATG20 for a year subscription for just $20. Help support this otherwise fine podcast and everyone else on the network as well. You can follow Ben and I on Twitter at Ben Remington, at Giles Farrell, and the podcast has a Twitter at GATG Wild Podcast. Also, find our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, search Giles and the Goalies. Hit the subscribe button on that for all of our video content, which I promise will come back in full force this next week. And, that can wrap it up for us. Thank you so much for listening again. We will chat with you again next week.
Later.
It's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.